based upon some of the complaints that he's going to hear about assessments. They are going to bring that up as a doorstep issue when the time comes again. This particular piece of legislation, and I've already said to the member, the minister personally, and I say it to him again publicly, he's had the courage to take this issue on, to move it out into the public domain, to have it go to law amendments so that we can hear from the various stakeholders involved, unlike the members of the Liberal Party. Unlike the members of the Liberal Party, the members of the third party who have never had the courage when they sat on that side of the House to deal with the issue. To deal with the issue. Stand and speak on the issue at length if you wish. The new members in particular should look at the fact that they, when they served on that side of the House, they did not have the courage to deal with this issue because it was just not important enough. It was just not an issue that really was of any consequence. Well, let me tell you, the members of the third party know now it is an issue of real concern. It's an issue of real concern from the UNSM. It's an issue of real concern from Nova Scotians and from the children of Nova Scotians. And that's an example which I want to bring to your attention, Madam Speaker. As you are well aware, I've had the opportunity to teach in the community of which I represent for many years. And a number of the young men and women that I've taught have moved on to other places outside of Nova Scotia. Outside of Nova Scotia. One in particular lives in the community of Mississauga, outside of Toronto. He would like to have the opportunity to inherit the land from his dad. He would like to have the opportunity to be able to use that piece of coastal property in future years, Madam Speaker, for a retirement home perhaps, but at this stage with his young family, a place where he can return to in the summer. But the problem is compounded, Madam Speaker, with the fact that the assessments have gone so high, and the assessments have gone so high that the father is having problems paying the taxes on that piece of land. He's being put in a situation where someone from the real estate business, I mean, they know the older Nova Scotians. They, I'm sure, have lawyers hired to go out and find these pieces of land. There's so many hectares of coastal property in some coastal community owned by an older gentleman or an older couple. They have no children who are living at home, a prime piece of real estate. And what is that gentleman to do when the real estate person arrives and says, I will give you this number of millions of dollars for this piece of land? Many of those older Nova Scotians, faced with the problem of not being able to pay the taxes on the land because of escalating assessments, they have to face a tough situation. They want to pass the land on to their children. They want to have the opportunity so that they can see their grandchildren when they not just come home for a few weeks in the summertime, but that they have an opportunity to see their family continue the tradition of living in that coastal community, whether it's for a few weeks, a month, or later on when they are fortunate enough to move back from Mississauga in this example. But you can imagine the alarm of this young man when the New York Times of April 11th, 2003, he reads bargains across the border, and I'm going to table this for the interest of the House, where a house on the water can cost less than an SUV. New York Times, April 11th, 2003. And accompanying that article are a number of photos, maps, pictures, and descriptions of coastal communities and land that have become available. So there is some history to this issue. There is some history to this issue. And let me tell you, the most recent history to this issue was the situation in Port Mattoon. And I know the member from Queens is concerned about this. I certainly know that the mayor of the regional municipality of Queens is concerned about this, that suddenly we have on eBay now the electronic way to sell destinations, islands, and coastal properties in this province, Canada's ocean playground. You know, Madam Speaker, if the trend continues, we might have to change that to America's ocean playground. Perhaps we could call it Europe's ocean playground, because as we continue to lose these gems along our coast, you know, let's face it, and I know members know this, there's something quite mystical about an island. And then it's even more mystical if it's your island. Your island. You know, my wife is a perfect example. She's from Prince Edward Island. And when that ad comes on where the little girl says, come play on my island, my wife says, you're right, that's my island. Now, Prince Edward Island, thankfully, is not for sale, because Prince Edward Island and the governments there have had the courage to deal with this issue many years before. Many years before, when they stepped in and they began to say they are not going to lose control of their coastline. They are not going to lose control of their greatest natural resource, which is the fact that why people come to Prince Edward Island, to see the coast, to be on the coast, to enjoy all the benefits of that wonderful island. But when you see islands such as Port Mattoon up for sale to the highest bidder, and people say, well, what's wrong with that? That's the free market economy. Let the market decide, and then if someone with those amounts of dollars can come forward, then they can own that island. Well, that's not how we should do it in Nova Scotia. And to the credit of the mayor of the municipality of Queens, he has taken the initiative to address this issue in his own area. And I encourage members opposite to become aware of some of these issues in their own area. I had a copy of the newspaper the other morning looking at real estate. Port Bickerton is next. Port Bickerton has a piece of coastal property for sale, and I believe, don't quote me on this, Madam Speaker, I think for $3 million. And people will say, the market value has allowed it to go at $3 million. What's wrong with that? Well, I'll tell you what's wrong with that, Madam Speaker. Nova Scotians will lose access to that. There will be gates, private road, no trespassing that will appear. Whether it's on islands or whether it's on coastal properties, this is an issue that has to be dealt with. And, Madam Speaker, a voluntary planning group led by Mr. Jim Muir toured this province and listened to Nova Scotians and their concerns about what they were saying, what Nova Scotians were saying about this important issue. And as they toured this province, they heard from Nova Scotians. And I'll table this one too for the member from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley, the beautiful Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley. And I'd like to quote from the beginning of it, because it is sent out by the MLA from Timberley Prospect. And Jim Muir said at Volunteer Planning, Mr. Estabrooks has been a passionate voice on the protection of coastal properties. He is one of the reasons we are having this province-wide review. So if the member opposite would like to see that, and I'm sure that the member opposite is also aware of the fact that those were expenses that were covered by the MLA from Timberley Prospect, mailed to the coastal community that he represents. So what happened after volunteer planning? And I know, Madam Speaker, you're involved in this issue right now. We see this issue with volunteer planning coming forward with a very controversial report, in which, of course, they've been allowed an extension of time, but that extension of time will allow more people to come forward with their concerns. You know, volunteer planning came forward with a report on non-resident ownership. And the last recommendation that they have proved really how spineless the whole process was. And I don't think spineless is unparliamentary, but let me tell you, I could get really graphic and call them gutless. Because the last one, Madam Speaker, the last recommendation of that volunteer planning group, that last recommendation was, assessments are not part of our mandate, so we are not going to deal with the issue. I mean, when you look, and then when I hear the spokesman on Port Mattoon when I hear the spokesman on Port Mattoon, and that issue is none other than Jim Muir, when I hear him as the chair of volunteer planning and non-resident ownership, he spoke on the CBC the other morning at length on this issue. CBC obviously wasn't doing very good research on that issue to allow that man, that chairman, to represent Nova Scotians because he portrayed it absolutely incorrectly. He portrayed it because that's what he thought he heard. If you went to any of the meetings and it was a 2-hour meeting, the number one accomplishment was to get Mr. Muir to sit down and let the Nova Scotians present to speak. But the report finally did come. And for the members opposite and the members of this side, I want you to know what has happened to the volunteer planning report on non-resident ownership since then. Day by day by day, as the member from Pictou West so graphically said, blow the dust off it. Nothing's happened to it. The issue sits idle. Nothing is really being taken care of by that particular report. It is, let's call it what it was, a PR exercise. A PR exercise so that now Nova Scotian could say they had their say. Mind you, no one listened, but they had their say. Now the issue is back. The issue is back. And I would like to, and I'll be tabling for the interests of the House, a letter from January 2nd, 2004, to the editor of the Bulletin and the Progress Enterprise from Hague, and Mr. McCaskill is no longer here in the House, and I would assume that's probably a Gaelic first name, Haigh, Carthew, and my apologies to Mr. Carthew for pronouncing either his surname or his first name incorrectly. But I'd like to table this letter, of which I've been given a copy by Mr. Carthew, and it's concerning Bill 40 and the Assessment Act. And there are a couple of points that he brings 4 points forward. I've encouraged Mr. Carthew, as I'm going to encourage other Nova Scotians, to come forward when this piece of legislation goes through to law amendments, as it rightfully should, because this government is addressing the issue, finally, but they're addressing the issue, and the minister. But let's look at these points that he brings up. And Mr. Speaker, if you can bear with me in the poor lighting of this place with my one good eye. The first concern is the fear that people on low or fixed incomes have that they will no longer be able to afford to live in their houses, or paradoxically, only able to afford them once they are sold. First concern, and I'm going to quote from these 4 points if I may, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Carthew also brings forth this concern with Bill 40, the inability to predict with any accuracy the value of future property taxes, and so determined the necessary financial planning to meet them. His third point is the lack of provision to facilitate minors, I assume he means by that sons and daughters, younger people, minors, incidentally, inheriting their family home. But the fourth point that Mr. Carthew brings forward is what he calls the sword of Damocles, quote unquote, the sword of Damocles, suspended over a whole community when neighboring properties are sold at a high value and the rest have their assessments arbitrarily increased to match those increases. Now, Damocles and that particular mythology, I believe it's a myth and not actually history, Mr. Speaker. I want you to know that that's the crux of the issue. The crux of the issue revolves around the concept of a neighborhood, a community, a road, or in some situations, and I know the member from Dartmouth North will probably speak on this, a street where there are a number of homes that have gone for sale, and that if you allow the market value to determine, the assessments will go up, and people will say on the street, the road, the neighborhood, or the coastal community, well, you could get such and such for that particular home or property, because aren't you aware that your neighbor across the street, across the road, or in the other cove, they sold the property for this number of hundreds of thousands, or in the example I brought to the House's attention earlier, the example of coastal communities for millions of dollars. So in return, you should be expected to pay this assessment. But the answer comes, many people don't want to sell their homes. Many people don't want to sell those coastal properties. Many people want to have the opportunity, the privilege, and I say to you, Mr. Speaker, the right to pass on their land, inheritance, in a homestead clause, as is included, pass on to their children. That's the concern. That's the concern that remains of primary interest to Nova Scotians. I want to point out to you, Mr. Speaker, the concern comes down to an issue that isn't addressed from my perspective in this piece of legislation. And I'll be looking forward to the presenters in law amendments about the issue of principal residence. Because I think we should address this issue openly and fairly, and people should understand that, let's take the example of Lunenburg. You know, if you're a well-connected lawyer, doctor, dentist from South End, Halifax, and you own or are able to afford an elite piece of property on the coast or on the Bredor Lakes, or you're in a situation where you can afford this amount of land, you in Lunenburg are a non-resident. You're a non-resident. You do not use that home, that cottage, that camp. I can show you some camps. Let me tell you, there's not too many camps that I've been to that have an indoor pool, that have a marina, and have a place, after all, where when the snow flies, everything can be put under cover, from the speedboats to the skidoos to the whole works. Sea-doos, they all can be put under cover. Now, I want you to know, and members should be aware of this, that this is an issue, the issue of principal residence. Principal residence. So that if you do not live within so many months in a year in a particular residence, and you have another residence in this province, in this country, or heaven forbid, and here's the controversial issue which we will not deal with in this province, this crowd certainly wouldn't deal with it, and that is, of course, the issue of non-resident ownership. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm well aware of the fact that in your constituency there is a well-known radio station called CKDH. And I know that when you're interviewed on CKDH, particular interview of which I'm speaking, when you bring forward concerns, you bring them forward on behalf of your constituents. And whether it's on the Parsborough shore or anywhere along the Northumberland Strait, I know well that this is an issue that is not just in Timberlea Prospect. This is not just an issue in Terrence Bay. This is not just an issue in St. Margaret's Bay. This is an issue that all Nova Scotians are concerned about. And Nova Scotians are watching, and Nova Scotians are listening. Nova Scotians want to hear what their MLA is going to say about this piece of legislation. So I would encourage members at opposite, members who have a concern about this particular piece of legislation, to stand in their place and have their say on what they think should happen as Bill 40 moves through this House and to law amendments. Because I know we will see you there. The list will be put out, and you'll look down through the list and, oh my God, there's someone there from Chester. And miraculously, the member from Chester St. Margaret's will show up as one of the questioners, thanking the person for taking the time and coming in front of law amendments, and hopefully asking a question or two, because inevitably the question is going to be asked back to that member, that person who is, after all, given the responsibility to represent the views of the people of that particular constituency. What do you really think about Bill 40? And then I will say to them, I will say to them, because many of the people that live throughout Nova Scotia are in contact with me on that issue for one reason or another, Mr. Speaker, and I will say to them, you should look up Hansard. Click on Hansard, then look under your MLA's name, see what he or she had to say on this particular piece of legislation, on that legislation. What did they say in Hansard? And hopefully, the member from Chester St. Margaret's, when he has his chance to speak in this legislature, his advice will be more than just appeal, 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 because that's no way to handle the issue. And I look at that member, I look at other members opposite, and I know what an important concern it is for these residents. It's also a major concern, Mr. Speaker, for the UNSM. And I would like to thank the UNSM executive for giving myself and the members of my caucus the opportunity to meet with them on a number of occasions, to meet with Mayor Morgan, who is the current president of the USM, to listen to councillors from throughout the province and mayors from throughout the province. You know, the mayor of Yarmouth attended a meeting at which time we were discussing a number of issues. And it was very interesting to hear the mayor of Yarmouth speak his mind and listen to what he says on this particular proposed piece of legislation. Will we get consensus from the UNSM? Will the municipalities across this province agree on any type of support of this piece of legislation? Mr. Speaker, I have no experience in municipal government, but I doubt it. I doubt it very much, because to the credit of the member from Victoria the Lakes, he has said one size doesn't fit all. But I remember, and I want that member to know, that he stood in his place when this bill was introduced and said, or he said it to the media, this is a good first step. Quote unquote. It's a good first step. But today, when he had a prepared text on this pretty emotional topic, the member from Victoria the Lakes stuck to the text. He read what was composed for him, so that when that particular press release comes out, the words will say in Hansard, don't stray too far one way or the other, member. Stick to the text. So the members of the third party should be aware, and there's some new members here, that when they were on that side of the government, when they were there on that side of the House in government, they were the biggest fence sitters around on this emotional issue. They were fence sitters. In fact, the response always was, when we raised the issue, whether it was Eric Creaser's case, whether it was the case of some of the other people throughout this province, and not all of them lived in Lunenburg, not all of them were from Riverton. When all of those examples were brought forward, let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, the members of the third party, when they sat on that side, kept telling us as the official opposition, that's not a big issue. Why do you keep bringing that issue up? Well, history has proven them wrong. And maybe, Mr. Speaker, maybe that's why they're not over there and they're over here, because they haven't dealt with the issue. They haven't dealt with this issue along with other issues. Now, I've seen the maps. I've seen the maps that represent problems of ownership in coastal communities across this province. And let's be clear on this. For the members who are coming in on the debate, we are talking about assessments. We're talking about Bill 40. We're talking about a piece of legislation that in some ways is going to be quite controversial, as assessments continue to jump, in some cases by skyrocketing amounts. It's not just salt water, it's water. It's parts of the lake system of this province. There are rivers. There are, after all, the Bedore Lakes, and of course, salt water and the Bedore Lakes and the beautiful areas that are there. There are areas, and it's been brought to my attention by the member from Cape Breton Nova, 14,000 square miles of coastal property. 1,400 square miles of coastal properties in the Bedore Lakes. Now, the concern, of course, comes down, Mr. Speaker. Cape Bretoners be able to afford that land with assessments continuing? No. More importantly, will Cape Bretoners be able to have the opportunity to pass this land on to their children? No. To pass their land on to their children so they can keep it within the tradition of that family who has lived there, perhaps settled there many hundreds of years before. So, Mr. Speaker, as I wrap up my comments, I'm looking forward to seeing this piece of legislation go through the law amendments. I've said it personally to the minister. I've said it to him again publicly. I thank him for bringing this legislation forward. We're looking forward to the response at law amendments, and I encourage all members of this House to stand in their place and have their say on this very important piece of Nova Scotian history as we look at an issue that must be dealt with today, during the next few weeks, and hopefully brought back to this House and become law in this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with privilege I stand to speak on this very important bill. You know, it had to be very difficult for the government to draft this bill because it has to be a balance. It has to be a balance between the revenues that the municipalities need to have to do the important work that they need, such as roads and infrastructure, and maintain all the things that they have to maintain through the process. And at the same time, provide the balance so people can afford to stay in their homes. Homes that sometimes people have lived in for, their families lived in for 200 or 300 years in this province. Or families that have saved and worked all their lives to build a home and put everything they have into it, find out that because of successive assessment increases and tax increases, they find that the home that they planned was going to be their ideal dream home to retire in, they can no longer afford to live in. And I've got several examples of that, and I'd like to cite one of a very good friend of mine who lives in a beautiful home, I will admit, not a beautiful home, but in the last 5 years, the assessment has gone up every year approximately $50,000. That's a tremendous increase in assessment. That's a $250,000 increase in assessment in 5 years. Now, the individual I'm talking about is on a fixed income, a pension income, simply cannot afford to stay in his home anymore. And that is outrageous as far as I'm concerned. And there's no way that the cost of the municipality has gone up that much on that particular property to justify that kind of a tax increase on that particular property. I think the bill is a beginning to work with, that we might be able to get some things in place that will help Nova Scotians stay in their home, because I think that's the intent of this bill. And hopefully with some amendments to it, I think it's going to have to be some pretty serious amendments in the bill to make that happen. And as my honourable colleague from our caucus has already indicated, there needs to be some flexibility. There needs to be some flexibility for municipalities. Every municipality isn't the same, and every municipality has to do something differently. And not all the assessments are going out of sight in all the municipalities throughout Nova Scotia. So I think that has to be considered. I'm concerned about the lack of detail in the bill, and again, too many things left to the Governor and Council, too many things left to regulations. Those things, I think, on tax assessments are very, very important factors, and it's very emotional for people when they talk about their homes and the possibility of not being able to live in their homes if their assessment has gone too high, or if their tax bill because of assessment has gone too high and they can no longer afford to live there, or they're approaching that. We have a lot of families in this province that are struggling, especially in the rural areas, in the areas where there's not employment opportunities for people to pay higher property taxes. But again, I've got to stress, at the same time, the municipalities need the funding to do the important work that they have to do. When they have to replace a street or repair a street, when they have to provide lighting for security, add firefighters, add police officers, whatever the case may be. And that's up to each individual municipality to have to decide and set their priorities to do that. But again, this bill I don't think addresses that whole issue. And it's an issue we really have to carefully consider before this is put into law, and maybe not be able to come back to this legislature for many, many years to get it corrected down the road. And you look at the way the assessments are going to be done, and the intent, I think, is excellent. But the approach is a little bit off the mark, because ideally, from what I understand from the bill, and the minister can correct me on this if I'm wrong, and I wished he would, as we go through the debate here, it appears that if you had a property in your family for, say, 50 years or something, and you apply under this act, And the Act indicates that, okay, you're going to get a credit on your assessment, which will indeed put your property taxes down, which is all positive. But someone next door moves in, buys a house of equal value, and they pay $200,000 for this house, and your house is still valued at, say, $110,000, as the property next door to them was prior to the sale of the property. And this one goes to $200,000. Now, this neighbor is paying $200,000 assessment and tax rate, while the one next door to them is paying $120,000 assessment tax rate. So when you put those together, it's not going to be very long. Neighbors are going to be fighting with neighbors. Neighbors are going to be calling up the assessment people, and I can't imagine what they're going to be telling them. It won't be very pleasant. I think that's not correct. And it's going to set inequities up in place. But then at the same time, you have to hit that balance. You have to hit the balance. You have to make sure people can afford to stay there. Maybe the people with the lower assessment are on a fixed income, retired, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter, fixed income. Maybe they're not. I have some neighbors. I have one neighbor that's built a gorgeous home, and his assessment's gone right through the roof. And his property tax is probably edging up to about $8,000 a year, and there's no sewer, no sidewalks, no curbs, no water, none of those things. But he says to me, I can afford to build the house, I can afford to pay the taxes. He doesn't mind. The problem will come for him when the day comes when he's not going to be able to pay those taxes anymore when he retires, if his income is fixed or he has a problem with his pension income. So we need a delicate balance with this bill, and we've got to make sure that we look at this and it's easily understandable by the general public. And I can tell you, reading through this bill, this is really complex or difficult to understand how it's actually going to be implemented. And you see some of the changes are going to be made here. I think some of them are very positive. I think some of them shouldn't be changed probably the way they are. And I look forward to the clarification by the minister when he speaks on this thing to clarify some of these things and maybe address some of these questions. Now, it also raises an issue of properties, because it covers all properties, this, not just the property you live in, but it covers all properties you own that are one unit or bare land, whichever the case may be. So in other words, you could have a cottage, you could have a single dwelling home, and have several hundred acres or 1,000 acres of property, and you could apply for all this tax reduction, which I think is quite positive. Your neighbor all of a sudden didn't have funds to buy these things, or his family wasn't fortunate enough to get these important assets over time, so they were fortunate enough to acquire these things over the period after this assessment's put in place. Then you're going to see the assessment again higher on this property, tax bill higher. Then the person here has been having these for a long time. So it's again a matter of equity. And it has to be done in a way that those who can afford to pay the taxes, and those who can't afford to pay the taxes don't have to pay them to a point that they have to sell their properties or move from their homes, their ancestral homes, or their homes that they've struggled to buy maybe over 20 or 30 years when they're looking forward to retirement. Now, some of the municipalities, I know the regional municipality in Halifax, regional municipality has a tax credit program for people with $26,000 a year income or less. And I think that works very, very well because it identifies people. It doesn't ask them if they're on a fixed income or if they're working poor, what the case may be, but at least it gives a tax break to people that have an income of $26,000 a year or less. And I think that's important. It identifies a particular group of people in the community that definitely need help. And if they're fortunate enough, and I mean fortunate enough to be able to have a home, it's nice to think that through some innovative programs that are available through the municipality, and hopefully this will be an innovative program when it's finally passed, will allow these people to stay in their homes and allow them to enjoy having their own property and building the equity that comes with that over time, and hopefully help their family when the time comes to sell that property and allow their family to continue living in a property. Now, I can remember when I bought my first home, I think it was $14,000, and that was a long time ago, and I won't tell you when it was, but it was a long time ago. It was a real battle raising the money to buy that home. But I can tell you I did, paid the mortgage off quite quickly, and was very fortunate that I had a good job and could do those things. and look forward to buying another home, which I did do. But so a lot of people aren't that fortunate, don't have those kind of assets, and don't have that available to them. So if this doesn't address the issue of people on fixed income being able to stay in their homes, I think we're missing the biggest problem we have with the assessments, the biggest problem we have. And if that isn't done, isn't addressed by this bill, we're not going to accomplish what this province needs to have done. There's nothing better than trying to keep a senior in the home. The government keeps saying, and all of us as politicians, all parties say that seniors should stay in their homes as long as they possibly can. I don't think anyone in the province argues with that. But if you property tax them to death, you maintenance cost them to death, and everything else that that people have to pay for in their property, all of a sudden that wonderful ancestral home that they had maybe for 100 years or whatever the case may be is gone. And they've got to move to an apartment, a senior's apartment, or some other place that really doesn't help their lifestyle, doesn't help them live a healthier, happier life. I mean, it's very, very negative when you have a senior going into that situation. And I feel that this bill has got to address that issue, and it's got to address that issue in a major way, not just indicate that this is going to affect everybody, and there's some people that have properties complain they can't afford to pay the taxes, but yet they're driving a really fancy car. So it makes you wonder if that's legitimate. And I'm not going to say that someone drives a nice car, it's because you're not paying their property tax, anything like that. But just the point I'm making is there's all kinds of choices you make in life, and some of them are better than others, and hopefully ones that stay in your home is one of the positive ones you make. Now, another issue I have on the assessment process is that during the last government's tenure here in running things, and when downloading on the municipalities came, the cost of assessments went to the municipalities, several $1 million, which affected the property tax rates for the property owners. So that meant in a lot of communities, the property taxes had to go up to pay for the new downloading from the provincial government, and that's unfortunate. That's another way that's helped or create a problem for people living in their homes. And a home is a very special thing, and anything that negatively affects you living in that home that the government does at any level, I think is regressive taxing of any type. And it should be very affordable for people to live in their homes and stay in their homes as long as they possibly can. And if we don't set the avenues in place to have that happen, we're doing a serious injustice to our total society. We're looking at our families, our own personal families, all the families that all Nova Scotians. When I say that if a senior can't stay in their home, we're all going backwards in our society. We're all falling backwards. And this bill does not address that issue. It does not address that issue at all, and it's an issue that has to be addressed here. When I say a senior, I'm talking a husband and wife combination, or a husband or a wife that may neither have either one left, unfortunately, to live with them. In that case, it's even more difficult for them to stay in their homes. If I can afford to own a $500,000 home and I'm working today, I can afford to pay the taxes. And if I can't afford to pay the taxes, I should get a hold of my municipal councillors to make sure that they keep the tax rate down so I can afford to pay it. And that's lobbying I should do as an individual to make sure the property taxes stay down. And I can tell you as a councillor and as an MLA, as years have gone by with this assessment thing, every time the assessment's out, your phone never stops ringing because they've gone up substantially. In a lot of cases, especially in my area, the assessment rates have gone right through the roof. We've seen some of them as high as 40%, 50%. In my own case, I had a 300% increase in assessment in 1 year. 300% increase in 1 year in assessment. So it begs the question, is this going to address some of these problems? I think the way it's written, it may. I think there's many changes that have to be made here to make sure it does affect those things. Now, if my property has gone up at my age 300%, that's fine. I can sell it and get my money back and buy another property. I have no problem with that. But if my next door neighbor is a senior, which they're not, by the way, because I don't want to identify my next door neighbor as being a senior or anybody, that doesn't want to be identified that way, if they can't stay in that home because they are a senior and their assessment has gone up 300%, and ultimately their tax bill has gone 300% up or more if the general tax rate has gone up in the municipality that year, how can they stay in their home? The answer is they can't. They just simply can't. And then you add all the extra fees and all the extra user fees that we've just seen introduced recently, all the fees for the pharmacare programs, everything else. You take someone on an income of $12,000 a year, fixed income of $12,000 a year. You take $50 a year from that person, and that's a serious impact on their lifestyle. Now, that doesn't sound like much, $50 a year. To any of us sitting in here, $50 a year is nothing. In real terms, it's nothing. It's probably a tank of gas while we're traveling around doing the things we do every day. But to someone on a fixed income of $12,000 a year or less, it's a serious issue. So the choice comes. Do I pay my property taxes? Do I get the drugs I need? Do I go to the grocery store that I need? Or do I get my car fixed because I need it to go to doctor's appointments? If I don't get it fixed, I can't go to doctor's appointments, and I'm going to be sicker than I am today if I am indeed sick. So you make all those choices, and you lump all those choices together, and then at the end of the day, something is lost, and something that is maybe badly needed for the senior. And you go and you look at the issues that they deal with every day, and you see the things that are so badly needed in the community. And if our communities seniors are driven away from our communities, and they don't have the ability to interact with their community, and the valuable resource and their expertise that's in that community from all the things they've seen, all the things they've made happen is gone. Our community loses. Our community loses big time. And it's something you can't replace. It's something you can't do a study on and put back in place again. You've lost part of the culture in the community. You've lost part of the people in the community that really have made a difference. A difference, I believe, is important for us to preserve, and a difference that we've got to make sure we maintain these people and listen to their requirements and help them stay in their homes as long as we possibly can. And then you've got another group of people that are on a fixed income of one type of another. You've got someone on workers' compensation possibly that's been injured at work, someone that's on Canada Pension Disability, whatever the case may be. And their incomes, again, are very low and fixed. They go up with the cost of living, maybe 1 or 2 cents. I was talking to a gentleman the other day, and he got his cost of rate of living increase on his workers' compensation check, and it was a whole 65 cents. So 65 cents doesn't do anything to help pay your property taxes. If your property taxes have gone up $150 or $200 this year, don't do a thing. Don't do a thing if your cost of heating oil has gone way up this year and will probably continue to go up. These things aren't easy to contend with. And typically, if you've got a senior, someone on a disability of some type or another, they can no longer do the maintenance around their own homes. So therefore, it's another cost incurred, a deterrent for people being able to stay in their homes. And all these things have to be added together, and we have to look at these things as legislators, and make sure that we take all these things into consideration before we negatively affect people's lives and the things that people do in life, and they should have the right to continue doing. I mean, if you're looking at a senior that can no longer have their family over for turkey dinner at Christmas time because they can't afford to buy a turkey, who's it wrong here? Tell me. I tell you, if we don't correct these sort of things and address these sort of issues in this bill, we're doing a serious injustice to the people of our province. I think this has to be done, and along at the same time, we have to make sure that we have the balance. The balance has got to be there, because the municipalities need the resources to do the things that they have to do to make sure we have better communities, safer communities to live in. But at the same time, we've got to make sure that the people that live in these homes can afford to maintain them and stay in them at a reasonable living standard, and not live in adverse poverty because they're being taxed to death by inadequate legislation and people not willing to listen to change and ideas that would make it possible for people to live. You know, I just spoke a few minutes ago about the user fees. I mean, you look at user fees on everything. And user fees are fine if they're necessary, but you look at a senior that has to have a car. Well, the price of gas has gone up. If they're a rural senior, they have to have a car. There's no transportation. Even in my area, there's no reliable transportation outside of a very small section of my riding. And I live in regional municipality in an area that is very affluent. I was to a meeting yesterday with the Prime Minister and a group of health professionals that come together and said, how can we help the people of Nova Scotia? And everyone around the table agreed, affordable, reliable transportation. Because people can't afford the expensive vehicles they need for if you need an accessibus or a van that you have to go in a wheelchair, or a senior that needs help with a walker or a wheelchair, or someone with a disability or is ill, getting back and forth to doctor's appointments. It's a long and trying operation. So if you add that cost into a fixed income, someone with a fixed income, you've again negatively impacted them. Then you put their property taxes up because your assessment's gone way up, you're negative. So you add all these things together and all of a sudden you get a situation that's untenable for people to live in. And I ask the minister and the government to really consider these issues, because these are issues that are important to Nova Scotians, important to people that want to live in their homes and stay in their homes and afford to do that. It's difficult to imagine someone living in their home and a tax bill comes in and the discussion around the dinner table that evening is, after they've seen their assessments goes up or the tax rate go up and thing, well, where are we going to move? The only place we can afford to move is low-cost housing. Low-cost housing in the seniors' apartments aren't easy to get into. There's not enough of them. And the government's had several $1 million from the federal government put in for low-cost housing. We have seen nothing happen there. So those things have to be taken into consideration too. And I would encourage the government to move on those more quickly and make sure that those things are put in place so that people can afford to move stay in their own home or have an alternative that they can go to with low-cost housing so people can go there and live in a reasonably good lifestyle that they've been accustomed to. And I'm not talking about the people that maybe haven't contributed a lot to society over the last 50 or 75, 60 years in their lifestyle. I'm talking about people who worked hard all their lives and contributed to the community and always been there at the church suppers and always been there helping the Boy Scouts and the Girl Guides and all the other organizations. They can no longer do that. They can't do it. And I think that's really got to be addressed in this bill as a small step to show these people in that situation that we're there listening to them and we're there trying to help them as well. And work it so it's not negatively impacting the municipalities. Now, if this is put in place the way it is, I think it would probably have a negative impact on the municipalities long term. The formulas to figure this all out are really complex, too complex. We need to see this more detail in the act of how an increase is going to be put on your assessment. If the assessment roll goes up by, say, 50% on someone's home, how it's calculated back to an amount that is realistic for the homeowner, and how it could be put in place that makes sense for everybody. And it has to be laid out right out in the act. I can remember one time I had a building, I had a serious fire in my business years ago. And I found out quite a while after we were doing repairs, and we were still using the building, but only part of it. We had several $100,000 worth of damage. I found out through the grapevine that, lo and behold, I could have had my business occupancy tax eliminated on the part of the business for the time that I wasn't operating that business out of there, because it was impossible to work out of there with the repair crews working. It was several months. So I called up the director of assessment and said, look, my business hasn't been operating in this portion of my business building. It was a big portion of my business, and it made a big difference in my property taxes that year. And the answer I got back was, it says in the act you have to notify us by registered letter within 30 days, and we'll initiate this process. Well, I said, look, It was on the front page of the newspaper, and I sent them a copy of the front page of the newspaper. Nope, that's no good. We haven't been notified. We don't know anything about the fire. So, and then I got a letter from the fire department and said, yes, the fire was at this time in this place. But the law said it had to be a registered letter at that time to the director of assessment. So I did send him the day I found out about a letter, and I got a month or so's break on my taxes, and then I sent him a letter back again when we were back in operation, let him know we were back in business. But it shows how important it is to have the right things in the act. Now that was a detriment to my business and probably every business in the province that didn't realize that happened. We were paying the business occupancy tax, which was quite substantial, well, very substantial actually, every year, and a significant business cost when you looked at operating a business. And a business that was competing with people all over the world. And in these negative things in bills that affect the cost for individuals, for businesses, and this is not a business act, I realize that, but it's the same scenario. Anything negatively to overall impacts our society here in Nova Scotia has a long-term impact on our overall economy. And you've got to keep that in mind. And if we don't look at our overall economy and things we can do to address that, we're never going to see a better place to live in Nova Scotia. And I can tell you in the last 3-4 years, things have sure got negative. We got higher taxes. We're now talking about dropping the income tax break we had, and user fees have gone up. Everything under the sun's got more expensive. So you see the price of gasoline going through the roof, heating fuel going through the roof. And you look at these things, and you talk to the average person now. One time, property taxes were an issue for seniors, but now you talk to average people, a person that works 5 days a week and comes home with a paycheck, reasonable paycheck. I'm not talking someone that works seasonally or anything like that, but someone who's got a 7-day a week or 5-day a week job, 52 weeks of the year, and comes home that would normally be able to come, plan a vacation. It's maybe not too far, but somewhere in the province, eliminating their vacations, sitting around the kitchen table with the wife at supper time and the family and saying, look, I don't know if we can afford to stay in our home anymore because it costs too much to heat it, it costs too much to pay the property taxes on it, the maintenance is too high, we just can't afford to stay here anymore. What's the alternative? Not good. The alternative is you sell your home, you move to an apartment building, and lo and behold, you don't have the high fuel costs anymore, although you pay it in your rent. You don't have the high property taxes, you pay that in your rent. And you don't have maybe the higher electrical bill because it's a smaller place you have and not the other cost to it. But the rent goes up all the time, and your family keeps going backwards and backwards with your total income. So the income for the average Nova Scotian is getting less and less and less that they can spend on the things that they need to spend it on. Never mind the things they should be spending on by trying to save funds up for education for the children to go to university or community college. But everything is interconnected. And if we don't have these things rectified and through fair taxation, this is serious. And I go back to seniors again. What about the senior that can't stay in their home? Maybe they're fortunate enough to have a daughter or son or in-laws or whatever the case may be. They'll say, okay, look, we'll pay the property taxes on your home. We will help you do the maintenance work. We'll do all these things to help you stay in your home. At the end of the day, that can only last so long, and not everybody can afford to do that. And not everybody has the time, resources, or expertise to do the repairs on the home. Maybe doesn't have the extra money to do help pay the taxes or the heat bill because they're struggling to keep their own home. And that's what this all comes down to. I think this bill the base of the bill is good. I think it's way too convoluted for anyone to understand what the benefit of it's going to be. I truly believe it has to be rewritten in a lot simpler way, and a lot more things have to be laid out. For instance, if there's going to be a rate increase, maximum rate increase for the people described in this on assessment, I think the formula has got to be laid out in the bill, not left behind for some director of assessment to set it or some regulation to set it that can be shuffled and moved around and manipulated to suit whatever the needs of the particular time is or whoever's lobbying the most. So I think that has to be put in the bill. I'd ask the minister to consider doing that. We also have to put something in this bill to make sure that seniors and individuals on fixed income are addressed in this bill. It's very, very important that that's the case. And I don't see it here. I really do not see it here. So I think we have to consider all those things, but all of these things we're considering, we must keep the family unit in mind, because a home is a sacred thing. It's a sacred thing to all Nova Scotians. It doesn't matter if you live in a home that's worth $20,000 or $2 million. It's a sacred thing to that family. And a home is a home. And if you don't set the structure in place that people with low income or fixed incomes are going to be able to stay in those homes and make sure that they can afford to stay in those homes, again, as a society, we haven't done the thing that we should be doing. We have to help people do that. And I balance it again with the fact that the municipality has to have the services to make sure those people, when they're staying in their home, that they have fire protection, the police protection they need, and all the other services that the municipalities provide to do these things. So again, I'd ask the government to keep those things into consideration. I'd ask them to, I'd like to hear the minister's responses. Unfortunately, he's not here right at the moment, but
Order, please.
he's...
Order, please. The all-member knows he's not allowed to indicate the presence or absence of a member of the House. And because of the hour, I'd ask the honourable member if he'd like to move adjournment debate, please.
Yes, I so move.
Motion to adjourn debate on Bill 40. Is it agreed? Just before I go to the Government House Leader, I'd like to call upon the honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity to apologize to the House and to the Deputy Speaker who was in the chair at the time. I've been made aware of the fact that the words spineless and gutless are inappropriate. I would say that they are lacking in courage to be replaced. If Hansard could take that under advisement, I would appreciate it. I apologize to the House and to you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Anyway, appreciate the member retracting the statement. Obviously, it's already recorded in Hansard, so I don't think it's possible to remove it. But however, I appreciate the member's apology and retraction. Thank you. Call upon the Government House Leader for the hours and business for Monday.
Yes, sir. Mr. Speaker, on Monday we'll meet at 4 p.m. and sit until 10. The order of business will be public bills for second reading. We will continue on with the Assessment Act, Mr. Speaker, and when we have completed that, we will go to Bill 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, and Bill 50, all for second reading. And Mr. Speaker, I hope everybody has a pleasant weekend. I would ask that we now adjourn and to meet again on Monday.
Motion is the House adjourned until 4 p.m. on Monday. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The House is adjourned until 4 p.m. Monday.